The Jewel of 7 Stars by Bram Stoker. Chapter 3. The Watchers. I was struck by the way the two young women looked at each other. I suppose I have been so much in the habit of weighing up in my own mind the personality of witnesses and of forming judgment by their unconscious action and mode of bearing themselves, that the habit extends to my life outside as well as within the courthouse. At this moment of my life, anything that interested Miss Trelawney interested me, and as she had been struck by the newcomer, I instinctively weighed her up also. By comparison of the two, I seemed somehow to gain a new knowledge of Miss Trelawney. Certainly the two women made a good contrast. Miss Trelawney was of fine figure, dark, straight-featured. She had marvelous eyes, great, wide open, and as black and soft as velvet, with a mysterious depth. To look in them was like gazing at a black mirror such as Dr. D used in his wizard rites. I heard an old gentleman at the picnic, a great oriental traveller, describe the effect of her eyes as looking at night at the great distant lamps of a mosque through the open door. The eyebrows were typical, finely arched and rich in long curling hair. They seemed like the proper architectural environment of the deep, splendid eyes. Her hair was black also, but was as fine as silk. Generally black hair is a type of animal strength, and seems as if some strong expression of the forces of a strong nature, but in this case there could be no such thought. There were refinement and high breeding, and though there was no suggestion of weakness, any sense of power there was rather spiritual than animal. The whole harmony of her being seemed complete. Carriage, figure, hair, eyes, the mobile, full mouth, whose scarlet lips and white teeth seemed to light up the lower part of the face, as the eyes did the upper, the wide sweep of the jaw from chin to ear, the long, fine fingers, the hand which seemed to move from the wrist as though it had a sentience of its own. All these perfections went to make up a personality that dominated either by its grace, its sweetness, its beauty, or its charm. Nurse Kennedy, on the other hand, was rather under than over a woman's average height. She was firm and thick-set, with full limbs and broad, strong, capable hands. Her colour was in the general effect that of an autumn leaf. The yellow-brown hair was thick and long, and the golden-brown eyes sparkled from the freckled, sunburnt skin. Her rosy cheeks gave a general idea of rich brown. The red lips and white teeth did not alter the colour scheme, but only emphasized it. She had a snub nose, there was no possible doubt about it, but like such noses in general, it showed a nature generous, untiring, and full of good nature. Her broad white forehead, which even the freckles had spared, was full of forceful thought and reason. Dr. Winchester had, on their journey from the hospital, coached her in the necessary particulars, and without a word she took charge of the patient and set to work. Having examined the new-made bed and shaken the pillows, she spoke to the doctor, who gave instructions. Presently we all four, stepping together, lifted the unconscious man from the sofa. Early in the afternoon, when Sergeant Daw had returned, I called at my rooms in Jermyn Street, and sent out such clothes, books, and papers as I should be likely to want within a few days. Then I went on to keep my legal engagements. The court sat late that day as an important case was ending. It was striking 6 as I drove in at the gate of the Kensington Palace Road. I found myself installed in a large room close to the sick chamber. That night we were not yet regularly organized for watching, so that the early part of the evening showed an unevenly balanced guard. Nurse Kennedy, who had been on duty all day, was lying down, as she had arranged to come on again by 12 o'clock. Dr. Winchester, who was dining in the house, remained in the room until dinner was announced, and went back at once when it was over. During dinner, Mrs. Grant remained in the room, and with her Sergeant Daw, who wished to complete a minute examination which he had undertaken of everything in the room and near it. At 9 o'clock, Miss Trelawney and I went in to relieve the doctor. She had lain down for a few hours in the afternoon so as to be refreshed for her work at night. She told me that she had determined that for this night at least she would sit up and watch. I did not try to dissuade her, for I knew that her mind was made up. Then and there I made up my mind that I would watch with her, unless, of course, I should see that she really did not wish it. I said nothing of my intentions for the present. We came in on tiptoe, so silently that the doctor, who was bending over the bed, did not hear us, and seemed a little startled when suddenly looking up, he saw eyes upon him. I felt that the mystery of the whole thing was getting on his nerves, as it had already got on the nerves of some others of us. He was, I fancied, a little annoyed with himself for having been so startled, and at once began to talk in a hurried manner as though to get over our idea of his embarrassment. I am really and absolutely at my wit's end to find any fit cause for this stupor. I have made again as accurate an examination as I know how, and I am satisfied that there is no injury to the brain, that is, no external injury. Indeed, all his vital organs seem unimpaired. I have given him, as you know, food several times, and it has manifestly done him good. His breathing is strong and regular, and his pulse is slower and stronger than it was this morning. I cannot find evidence of any known drug, and his unconsciousness does not resemble any of the many cases of hypnotic sleep which I saw in the Charcot Hospital in Paris. And as to these wounds, he laid his finger gently on the bandaged wrist which lay outside the coverlet as he spoke. I do not know what to make of them. They might have been made by a carding machine, but that supposition is untenable. It is within the bounds of possibility that they might have been made by a wild animal if it had taken care to sharpen its claws. That, too, is, I take it, impossible. By the way, have you any strange pets here in the house? Anything of an exceptional kind, such as a tiger cat, or anything out of the common? Miss Trelawney smiled a sad smile which made my heart ache, as she made answer, "Oh no, Father does not like animals about the house, unless they are dead and mummied." This was said with a touch of bitterness or jealousy, I could hardly tell which. Even my poor kitten was only allowed in the house on sufferance, and though he is the dearest and best-conducted cat in the world, he is now on a sort of parole, and is not allowed into this room. As she was speaking, a faint rattling of the door-handle was heard. Instantly Miss Trelawney's face brightened. She sprang up and went over to the door, saying as she went, "There he is. That is my Silvio. He stands on his hind legs and rattles the door-handle when he wants to come into a room." She opened the door, speaking to the cat as though he were a baby. "Did him want his mover? Come then, but he must stay with her." She lifted the cat and came back with him in her arms. He was certainly a magnificent animal. A chinchilla-grey Persian with long silky hair. A really lordly animal with a haughty bearing despite his gentleness, and with great paws which spread out as he placed them on the ground. While she was fondling him, he suddenly gave a wriggle like an eel and slipped out of her arms. He ran across the room and stood opposite a low table on which stood the mummy of an animal, and began to mew and snarl. Miss Trelawney was after him in an instant, and lifted him in her arms, kicking and struggling and wriggling to get away, but not biting or scratching, for evidently he loved his beautiful mistress. He ceased to make a noise the moment he was in her arms. In a whisper she admonished him, "Oh, you naughty Silvio, you have broken your parole that mother gave for you. Now say good night to the gentleman, and come away to mother's room." As she was speaking, she held out the cat's paw to me to shake. As I did so, I could not but admire its size and beauty. "Why," said I, "his paw seems like a little boxing glove full of claws." She smiled. "So it ought to. Don't you notice that my Silvio has 7 toes, see?" She opened the paw, and surely enough there were 7 separate claws, each of them sheathed in a delicate, fine, shell-like case. As I gently stroked the foot, The claws emerged, and one of them accidentally there was no anger now, and the cat was purring stuck into my hand. Instinctively I said as I drew back, "Why, his claws are like razors." Dr. Winchester had come close to us, and was bending over looking at the cat's claws. As I spoke, he said in a quick, sharp way, "Eh!" I could hear the quick intake of his breath. Whilst I was stroking the now quiescent cat, the doctor went to the table and tore off a piece of blotting paper from the writing pad, and came back. He laid the paper on his palm and, with a simple "Pardon me" to Miss Trelawney, placed the cat's paw on it and pressed it down with his other hand. The haughty cat seemed to resent somewhat the familiarity and tried to draw its foot away. This was plainly what the doctor wanted, for in the act, the cat opened the sheaths of its claws and made several reefs in the soft paper. Then Miss Trelawney took her pet away. She returned in a couple of minutes. As she came in, she said, "It is most odd about that mummy. When Silvio came into the room first indeed, I took him in as a kitten to show to father. He went on just the same way. He jumped up on the table and tried to scratch and bite the mummy. That was what made father so angry and brought the decree of banishment on poor Silvio. Only his parole, given through me, kept him in the house." Whilst she had been gone, Dr. Winchester had taken the bandage from her father's wrist. The wound was now quite clear, as the separate cuts showed out in fierce red lines. The doctor folded the blotting paper across the line of punctures made by the cat's claws and held it down close to the wound. As he did so, he looked up triumphantly and beckoned us over to him. The cuts in the paper corresponded with the wounds in the wrist. No explanation was needed, as he said. It would have been better if Master Silvio had not broken his parole. We were all silent for a little while. Suddenly Miss Trelawney said, "But Silvio was not in here last night." "Are you sure? Could you prove that if necessary?" She hesitated before replying, "I am certain of it, but I fear it would be difficult to prove. Silvio sleeps in a basket in my room. I certainly put him to bed last night. I remember distinctly laying his little blanket over him and tucking him in. This morning, I took him out of the basket myself. I certainly never noticed him in here, though, of course, that would not mean much, for I was too concerned about poor father and too much occupied with him to notice even Silvio." The doctor shook his head as he said with a certain sadness, "Well, at any rate it is no use trying to prove anything now. Any cat in the world would have cleaned blood marks, did any exist, from his paws in 100th part of the time that has elapsed." Again we were all silent, and again the silence was broken by Miss Trelawney. But now that I think of it, it could not have been poor Silvio that injured father. My door was shut when I first heard the sound, and father's was shut when I listened at it. When I went in, the injury had been done, so that it must have been before Silvio could possibly have got in. This reasoning commended itself, especially to me as a barrister, for it was proof to satisfy a jury. It gave me a distinct pleasure to have Silvio acquitted of the crime, possibly because he was Miss Trelawney's cat and was loved by her. Happy cat. Silvio's mistress was manifestly pleased, as I said. Verdict, not guilty. Dr. Winchester, after a pause, observed, "My apologies to Master Silvio on this occasion, but I am still puzzled to know why he is so keen against that mummy. Is he the same toward the other mummies in the house? There are, I suppose, a lot of them. I saw 3 in the hall as I came in." "There are lots of them," she answered. "I sometimes don't know whether I am in a private house or the British Museum. But Silvio never concerns himself about any of them, except that particular one. I suppose it must be because it is of an animal, not a man or a woman." "Perhaps it is of a cat," said the doctor, as he started up and went across the room to look at the mummy more closely. "Yes," he went on, "it is the mummy of a cat. And a very fine one, too. If it hadn't been a special favorite of some very special person, it would never have received so much honor. See, a painted case and obsidian eyes, just like a human mummy. It is an extraordinary thing, that knowledge of kind to kind. Here is a dead cat, that is all. It is perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 years old, and another cat of another breed, in what is practically another world, is ready to fly at it, just as it would if it were not dead. I should like to experiment a bit about that cat, if you don't mind, Miss Trelawney." She hesitated before replying, "Of course. Do anything you may think necessary or wise, but I hope it will not be anything to hurt or worry my poor Silvio." The doctor smiled as he answered, "Oh, Silvio would be all right. It is the other one that my sympathies would be reserved for." "How do you mean?" "Master Silvio will do the attacking. The other one will do the suffering." "Suffering?" There was a note of pain in her voice. The doctor smiled more broadly. "Oh, please make your mind easy as to that. The other won't suffer as we understand it, except perhaps in his structure and outfit." "What on earth do you mean?" "Simply this, my dear young lady, that the antagonist will be a mummy cat like this one. There are, I take it, plenty of them to be had in Museum Street. I shall get one and place it here instead of that one. You won't think that a temporary exchange will violate your father's instructions, I hope. We shall then find out, to begin with, whether Silvio objects to all mummy cats, or only to this one in particular." "I don't know," she said doubtfully. "Father's instructions seem very uncompromising." Then after a pause she went on, "But of course, under the circumstances, anything that is to be ultimately for his good must be done. I suppose there can't be anything very particular about the mummy of a cat." Dr. Winchester said nothing. He sat rigid, with so grave a look on his face that his extra gravity passed on to me, and in its enlightening perturbation I began to realize more than I had yet done the strangeness of the case in which I was now so deeply concerned. When once this thought had begun, there was no end to it. Indeed, it grew and blossomed and reproduced itself in 1,000 different ways. The room and all in it gave grounds for strange thoughts. There were so many ancient relics that unconsciously one was taken back to strange lands and strange times. There were so many mummies or mummy objects, round which there seemed to cling forever the penetrating odours of bitumen, and spices and gums nard and Circassia's balmy smells, that one was unable to forget the past. Of course, there was but little light in the room, and that carefully shaded, so that there was no glare anywhere, none of that direct light which can manifest itself as a power or an entity, and so make for companionship. The room was a large one, and lofty in proportion to its size. In its vastness was place for a multitude of things not often found in a bedchamber. In far corners of the room were shadows of uncanny shape. More than once, as I thought, the multitudinous presence of the dead and the past took such hold on me that I caught myself looking round fearfully as though some strange personality or influence was present. Even the manifest presence of Dr. Winchester and Miss Trelawney could not altogether comfort or satisfy me at such moments. It was with a distinct sense of relief that I saw a new personality in the room in the shape of Nurse Kennedy. There was no doubt that that businesslike, self-reliant, capable young woman added an element of security to such wild imaginings as my own. She had a quality of common sense that seemed to pervade everything around her, as though it were some kind of emanation. Up to that moment, I had been building fancies around the sick man, so that finally all about him, including myself, had become involved in them, or enmeshed, or saturated, or... But now that she had come, he relapsed into his proper perspective as a patient. The room was a sick room, and the shadows lost their fearsome quality. The only thing which it could not altogether abrogate was the strange Egyptian smell. You may put a mummy in a glass case and hermetically seal it so that no corroding air can get within, but all the same it will exhale its odor. One might think that 4,000 or 5,000 years would exhaust the olfactory qualities of anything, but experience teaches us that these smells remain and that their secrets are unknown to us. Today they are as much mysteries as they were when the embalmers put the body in the bath of natron. All at once I sat up. I had become lost in an absorbing reverie. The Egyptian smell had seemed to get on my nerves, on my memory, on my very will. At that moment, I had a thought which was like an inspiration. If I was influenced in such a manner by the smell, might it not be that the sick man, who lived half his life or more in the atmosphere, had gradually and by slow but sure process taken into his system something which had permeated him to such degree that it had a new power derived from quantity or strength, or I was becoming lost again in a reverie. This would not do. I must take such precaution that I could remain awake, or free from such entrancing thought. I had had but half a night's sleep last night, and this night I must remain awake, without stating my intention, for I feared that I might add to the trouble and uneasiness of Miss Trelawney. I went downstairs and out of the house. I soon found a chemist's shop, and came away with a respirator. When I got back, it was 10 o'clock. The doctor was going for the night. The nurse came with him to the door of the sick room, taking her last instructions. Miss Trelawney sat still beside the bed. Sergeant Daw, who had entered as the doctor went out, was some little distance off. When Nurse Kennedy joined us, we arranged that she should sit up till 2 o'clock, when Miss Trelawney would relieve her. Thus, in accordance with Mr. Trelawney's instructions, there would always be a man and a woman in the room, and each one of us would overlap, so that at no time would a new set of watchers come on duty without someone to tell of what if anything had occurred. I lay down on a sofa in my own room, having arranged that one of the servants should call me a little before 12. In a few moments I was asleep. When I was waked, it took me several seconds to get back my thoughts so as to recognize my own identity and surroundings. The short sleep had, however, done me good, and I could look on things around me in a more practical light than I had been able to do earlier in the evening. I bathed my face, and thus refreshed went into the sick room. I moved very softly. The nurse was sitting by the bed, quiet and alert. The detective sat in an armchair across the room in deep shadow. He did not move when I crossed, until I got close to him, when he said in a dull whisper, "It is all right. I have not been asleep." An unnecessary thing to say, I thought it always is, unless it be untrue in spirit. When I told him that his watch was over, that he might go to bed till I should call him at 6 o'clock, he seemed relieved and went with alacrity. At the door he turned, and, coming back to me, said in a whisper, "I sleep lightly, and I shall have my pistols with me. I won't feel so heavy-headed when I get out of this mummy smell." He too, then, had shared my experience of drowsiness. I asked the nurse if she wanted anything. I noticed that she had a vinaigrette in her lap. Doubtless she too had felt some of the influence which had so affected me. She said that she had all she required, but that if she should want anything, she would at once let me know. I wished to keep her from noticing my respirator, so I went to the chair in the shadow, where her back was toward me. Here I quietly put it on, and made myself comfortable. For what seemed a long time, I sat and thought and thought. It was a wild medley of thoughts, as might have been expected from the experiences of the previous day and night. Again I found myself thinking of the Egyptian smell, and I remember that I felt a delicious satisfaction that I did not experience it as I had done. The respirator was doing its work. It must have been that the passing of this disturbing thought made for repose of mind, which is the corollary of bodily rest, for, Though I really cannot remember being asleep or waking from it, I saw a vision. I dreamed a dream. I scarcely know which. I was still in the room, seated in the chair. I had on my respirator and knew that I breathed freely. The nurse sat in her chair with her back toward me. She sat quite still. The sick man lay as still as the dead. It was rather like the picture of a scene than the reality. All was still and silent, and the stillness and silence were continuous. Outside in the distance I could hear the sounds of a city, the occasional roll of wheels, the shout of a reveller, the faraway echo of whistles and the rumbling of trains. The light was very, very low. The reflection of it under the green-shaded lamp was a dim relief to the darkness, rather than light. The green silk fringe of the lamp had merely the color of an emerald seen in the moonlight. The room, for all its darkness, was full of shadows. It seemed in my whirling thoughts as though all the real things had become shadows which moved, for they passed the dim outline of the high windows, shadows which had sentience. I even thought there was sound, a faint sound as of the mew of a cat, the rustle of drapery and a metallic clink as of metal faintly touching metal. I sat as one entranced. At last I felt, as in nightmare, that this was sleep, and that in the passing of its portals all my will had gone. All at once my senses were full awake. A shriek rang in my ears. The room was filled suddenly with a blaze of light. There was the sound of pistol shots, 1, 2, and a haze of white smoke in the room. When my waking eyes regained their power, I could have shrieked with horror myself at what I saw before me. Chapter 4. The second attempt. The sight which met my eyes had the horror of a dream within a dream, with the certainty of reality added. The room was as I had seen it last, except that the shadowy look had gone in the glare of the many lights, and every article in it stood stark and solidly real. By the empty bed sat Nurse Kennedy, as my eyes had last seen her, sitting bolt upright in the armchair beside the bed. She'd placed a pillow behind her, so that her back might be erect, but her neck was fixed as that of one in a cataleptic trance. She was, to all intents and purposes, turned into stone. There was no special expression on her face, no fear, no horror, nothing such as might be expected of one in such a condition. Her open eyes showed neither wonder nor interest. She was simply a negative existence, warm, breathing, placid, but absolutely unconscious of the world around her. The bedclothes were disarranged, as though the patient had been drawn from under them without throwing them back. The corner of the upper sheet hung upon the floor. Close by it lay one of the bandages with which the doctor had dressed the wounded wrist. Another and another lay further along the floor, as though forming a clue to where the sick man now lay. This was almost exactly where he had been found on the previous night, under the great safe. Again the left arm lay toward the safe. But there had been a new outrage. An attempt had been made to sever the arm close to the bangle which held the tiny key. A heavy kukri, knife, one of the leaf-shaped knives which the Gurkhas and others of the hill tribes of India use with such effect, had been taken from its place on the wall, and with it the attempt had been made. It was manifest that just at the moment of striking the blow had been arrested, for only the point of the knife and not the edge of the blade had struck the flesh. As it was, the outer side of the arm had been cut to the bone, and the blood was pouring out. In addition, the former wound in front of the arm had been cut or torn about terribly. One of the cuts seemed to jet out blood, as if with each pulsation of the heart. By the side of her father knelt Miss Trelawney, her white nightdress stained with the blood in which she knelt. In the middle of the room, Sergeant Dorr, in his shirt and trousers and stocking feet, was putting fresh cartridges into his revolver, in a dazed, mechanical kind of way. His eyes were red and heavy, and he seemed only half awake, and less than half conscious of what was going on around him. Several servants, bearing lights of various kinds, were clustered round the doorway. As I rose from my chair and came forward, Miss Trelawney raised her eyes toward me. When she saw me, she shrieked and started to her feet, pointing towards me. Never shall I forget the strange picture she made, with her white drapery all smeared with blood, which, as she rose from the pool, ran in streaks toward her bare feet. I believe that I had only been asleep, that whatever influence had worked on Mr. Trelawney and Nurse Kennedy, and in less degree on Sergeant Daw, had not touched me. The respirator had been of some service, though it had not kept off the tragedy whose dire evidences were before me. I can understand now, I could understand even then, the fright, added to that which had gone before, which my appearance must have evoked. I had still on the respirator, which covered mouth and nose. My hair had been tossed in my sleep. Coming suddenly forward, thus enwrapped and dishevelled, in that horrified crowd, I must have had, in the strange mixture of lights, an extraordinary and terrifying appearance. It was well that I recognized all this in time to avert another catastrophe, for the half-dazed, mechanically acting detective put in the cartridges and had raised his revolver to shoot at me when I succeeded in wrenching off the respirator and shouting to him to hold his hand. In this also he acted mechanically. The red, half-awake eyes had not in them, even then, the intention of conscious action. The danger, however, was averted. The relief of the situation, strangely enough, came in a simple fashion. Mrs. Grant, seeing that her young mistress had on only her nightdress, had gone to fetch a dressing-gown, which she now threw over her. This simple act brought us all back to the region of fact. With a long breath, one and all seemed to devote themselves to the most pressing matter before us, that of staunching the flow of blood from the arm of the wounded man. Even as the thought of action came, I rejoiced, for the bleeding was very proof that Mr. Trelawney still lived. Last night's lesson was not thrown away. More than one of those present knew now what to do in such an emergency, and within a few seconds, willing hands were at work on a tourniquet. A man was at once dispatched for the doctor, and several of the servants disappeared to make themselves respectable. We lifted Mr. Trelawney onto the sofa where he had lain yesterday, and having done what we could for him, turned our attention to the nurse. In all the turmoil she had not stirred. She sat there as before, erect and rigid, breathing softly and naturally and with a placid smile. As it was manifestly of no use to attempt anything with her till the doctor had come, we began to think of the general situation. Mrs. Grant had by this time taken her mistress away and changed her clothes, for she was back presently in a dressing-gown and slippers, and with the traces of blood removed from her hands. She was now much calmer, though she trembled sadly, and her face was ghastly white. When she had looked at her father's wrist, I holding the tourniquet, she turned her eyes round the room, resting them now and again on each one of us present in turn, but seeming to find no comfort. It was so apparent to me that she did not know where to begin or whom to trust that, to reassure her, I said, "I am all right now. I was only asleep." Her voice had a gulp in it as she said in a low voice, "Asleep, you, and my father in danger. I thought you were on the watch. I felt the sting of justice in the reproach, but I really wanted to help her, so I answered, 'Only asleep. It is bad enough, I know, but there is something more than an only round us here. Had it not been that I took a definite precaution, I might have been like the nurse there.' She turned her eyes swiftly on the weird figure, sitting grimly upright like a painted statue, and then her face softened. With the action of habitual courtesy, she said, 'Forgive me. I did not mean to be rude, but I am in such distress and fear that I hardly know what I am saying. Oh, it is dreadful. I fear for fresh trouble and horror and mystery every moment.' This cut me to the very heart, and out of the heart's fullness I spoke. Don't give me a thought. I don't deserve it. I was on guard, and yet I slept. All that I can say is that I didn't mean to, and I tried to avoid it. But it was over me before I knew it. Anyhow, it is done now, and can't be undone. Probably someday we may understand it all, but now let us try to get at some idea of what has happened. Tell me what you remember. The effort to recollect seemed to stimulate her. She became calmer as she spoke. I was asleep, and woke suddenly with the same horrible feeling on me that father was in great and immediate danger. I jumped up and ran, just as I was, into his room. It was nearly pitch dark, but as I opened the door there was light enough to see father's nightdress as he lay on the floor under the safe, just as on that first awful night. Then I think I must have gone mad for a moment. She stopped and shuddered. My eyes lit on Sergeant Dorr, still fiddling in an aimless way with the revolver. Mindful of my work with the tourniquet, I said calmly, "Now tell us, Sergeant Dorr, what did you fire at?" The policeman seemed to pull himself together with the habit of obedience. Looking around at the servants remaining in the room, he said with that air of importance which, I take it, is the regulation attitude of an official of the law before strangers, "Don't you think, sir, that we can allow the servants to go away? We can then better go into the matter." I nodded approval. The servants took the hint and withdrew, though unwillingly, the last one closing the door behind him. Then the detective went on. "I think I had better tell you my impressions, sir, rather than recount my actions. That is, so far as I remember them." There was a mortified deference now in his manner, which probably arose from his consciousness of the awkward position in which he found himself. I went to sleep half-dressed as I am now, with a revolver under my pillow. It was the last thing I remember thinking of. I do not know how long I slept. I had turned off the electric light, and it was quite dark. I thought I heard a scream, but I can't be sure, for I felt thick-headed as a man does when he is called too soon after an extra long stretch of work. Not that such was the case this time. Anyhow, my thoughts flew to the pistol. I took it out and ran onto the landing. Then I heard a sort of scream, or rather a call for help, and ran into this room. The room was dark, for the lamp beside the nurse was out, and the only light was that from the landing, coming through the open door. Miss Trelawney was kneeling on the floor beside her father, and was screaming. I thought I saw something move between me and the window, so, without thinking, and being half-dazed and only half-awake, I shot at it. It moved a little more to the right between the windows, and I shot again. Then you came up out of the big chair with all that muffling on your face. It seemed to me, being as I say half-dazed and half-awake, I know, sir, you will take this into account as if it had been you being in the same direction as the thing I had fired at. And so I was about to fire again, when you pulled off the wrap. Here I asked him I was cross-examining now and felt at home. You say you thought I was the thing you fired at. What thing? The man scratched his head but made no reply. Come, sir, I said. What thing? What was it like? The answer came in a low voice. I don't know, sir. I thought there was something, but what it was, or what it was like, I haven't the faintest notion. I suppose it was because I had been thinking of the pistol before I went to sleep, and because when I came in here I was half-dazed and only half-awake, which I hope you will in future, sir, always remember. He clung to that formula of excuse as though it were his sheet anchor. I did not want to antagonize the man. On the contrary, I wanted to have him with us. Besides, I had on me at that time myself the shadow of my own default. So I said, as kindly as I knew how, Quite right, Sergeant. Your impulse was correct. Though, of course, in the half-somnolent condition in which you were, and perhaps partly affected by the same influence, whatever it may be, which made me sleep and which has put the nurse in that cataleptic trance, it could not be expected that you would pause to weigh matters. But now, whilst the matter is fresh, let me see exactly where you stood and where I sat. we shall be able to trace the course of your bullets." The prospect of action and the exercise of his habitual skill seemed to brace him at once. He seemed a different man as he set about his work. I asked Mrs. Grant to hold the tourniquet, and went and stood where he had stood, and looked where, in the darkness, he had pointed. I could not but notice the mechanical exactness of his mind, as when he showed me where he had stood, or drew, as a matter of course, the revolver from his pistol pocket, and pointed with it. The chair from which I had risen still stood in its place. Then I asked him to point with his hand only, as I wished to move in the track of his shot. Just behind my chair, and a little back of it, stood a high buhl cabinet. The glass door was shattered. I asked, "Was this the direction of your first shot or your second?" The answer came promptly. "The second. The first was over there." He turned a little to the left, more toward the wall where the great safe stood, and pointed. I followed the direction of his hand, and came to the low table whereon rested, amongst other curios, the mummy of the cat which had raised Silvio's ire. I got a candle and easily found the mark of the bullet. It had broken a little glass vase and a tazza of black basalt, exquisitely engraved with hieroglyphics, the graven lines being filled with some faint green cement and the whole thing being polished to an equal surface. The bullet, flattened against the wall, lay on the table. I then went to the broken cabinet. It was evidently a receptacle for valuable curios, for in it were some great scarabs of gold, agate, green jasper, amethyst, lapis lazuli, opal, granite, and blue-green china. None of these things happily were touched. The bullet had gone through the back of the cabinet, but no other damage, save the shattering of the glass, had been done. I could not but notice the strange arrangement of the curios on the shelf of the cabinet. All the scarabs, rings, amulets, etc., were arranged in an uneven oval round an exquisitely carved golden miniature figure of a hawk-headed god crowned with a disk and plumes. I did not wait to look further at present, for my attention was demanded by more pressing things, but I determined to make a more minute examination when I should have time. It was evident that some of the strange Egyptian smell clung to these old curios. Through the broken glass came an added whiff of spice and gum and bitumen, almost stronger than those I had already noticed as coming from others in the room. All this had really taken but a few minutes. I was surprised when my eye met, through the chinks between the dark window blinds and the window cases, the brighter light of the coming dawn. When I went back to the sofa and took the tourniquet from Mrs. Grant, she went over and pulled up the blinds. It would be hard to imagine anything more ghastly than the appearance of the room with the faint grey light of early morning coming in upon it. As the windows faced north, any light that came was a fixed grey light without any of the rosy possibility of dawn which comes in the eastern quarter of heaven. The electric lights seemed dull and yet glaring, and every shadow was of a hard intensity. There was nothing of morning freshness, nothing of the softness of night. All was hard and cold and inexpressibly dreary. The face of the senseless man on the sofa seemed of a ghastly yellow, and the nurse's face had taken a suggestion of green from the shade of the lamp near her. Only Miss Trelawney's face looked white, and it was of a pallor which made my heart ache. It looked as if nothing on God's earth could ever again bring back to it the colour of life and happiness. It was a relief to us all when Dr. Winchester came in, breathless with running. He only asked one question: "Can anyone tell me anything of how this wound was gotten?" On seeing the headshake which went round us under his glance, he said no more, but applied himself to his surgical work. For an instant he looked up at the nurse, sitting so still, but then bent himself to his task, a grave frown contracting his brows. It was not till the arteries were tied and the wounds completely dressed that he spoke again, except, of course, when he had asked for anything to be handed to him or to be done for him. When Mr. Trelawney's wounds had been thoroughly cared for, he said to Miss Trelawney, "What about Nurse Kennedy?" She answered at once, "I really do not know." I found her when I came into the room at 2:30, sitting exactly as she does now. We have not moved her, or changed her position. She has not wakened since. Even Sergeant Dawes' pistol shots did not disturb her. Pistol shots? Have you then discovered any cause for this new outrage? The rest were silent, so I answered, "We have discovered nothing." I was in the room watching with the nurse. Earlier in the evening I fancied that the mummy smells were making me drowsy, so I went out and got a respirator. I had it on when I came on duty, but it did not keep me from going to sleep. I woke to see the room full of people. That is, Miss Trelawney and Sergeant Daw, being only half awake and still stupefied by the same scent or influence which had affected us, fancied that he saw something moving through the shadowy darkness of the room, and fired twice. When I rose out of my chair, with my face swathed in the respirator, he took me for the cause of the trouble. Naturally enough, he was about to fire again, when I was fortunately in time to manifest my identity. Mr. Trelawney was lying beside the safe, just as he was found last night, and was bleeding profusely from the new wound in his wrist. We lifted him on the sofa and made a tourniquet. That is, literally and absolutely all that any of us know as yet. We have not touched the knife which you see lies close by the pool of blood. "Look," I said, going over and lifting it. "The point is red with the blood which has dried." Dr. Winchester stood quite still a few minutes before speaking. "Then the doings of this night are quite as mysterious as those of last night." "Quite," I answered. He said nothing in reply, but turning to Miss Trelawney said, "We had better take Nurse Kennedy into another room. I suppose there is nothing to prevent it." "Nothing. Please, Mrs. Grant, see that Nurse Kennedy's room is ready, and ask 2 of the men to come and carry her in." Mrs. Grant went out immediately, and in a few minutes came back saying, "The room is quite ready, and the men are here." By her direction 2 footmen came into the room, and lifting up the rigid body of Nurse Kennedy under the supervision of the doctor, carried her out of the room. Miss Trelawney remained with me in the sick chamber, and Mrs. Grant went with the doctor into the nurse's room. When we were alone, Miss Trelawney came over to me, and taking both my hands in hers, said, "I hope you won't remember what I said. I did not mean it, and I was distraught." I did not make reply, but I held her hands and kissed them. There are different ways of kissing a lady's hands. This way was intended as homage and respect, and it was accepted as such in the high-bred, dignified way which marked Miss Trelawney's bearing and every movement. I went over to the sofa and looked down at the senseless man. The dawn had come much nearer in the last few minutes, and there was something of the clearness of day in the light. As I looked at the stern, cold, set face, now as white as a marble monument in the pale grey light, I could not but feel that there was some deep mystery beyond all that had happened within the last 26 hours. Those beetling brows screened some massive purpose. That high, broad forehead held some finished train of reasoning, which the broad chin and massive jaw would help to carry into effect. As I looked and wondered, there began to steal over me again that phase of wandering thought which had last night heralded the approach of sleep. I resisted it, and held myself sternly to the present. This was easier to do when Miss Trelawney came close to me, and, leaning her forehead against my shoulder, began to cry silently. Then all the manhood in me woke, and to present purpose. It was of little use trying to speak. Words were inadequate to thought. But we understood each other. She did not draw away when I put arm protectingly over her shoulder, as I used to do with my little sister long ago when in her childish trouble she would come to her big brother to be comforted. That very act or attitude of protection made me more resolute in my purpose, and seemed to clear my brain of idle, dreamy wandering in thought. With an instinct of greater protection, however, I took away my arm as I heard the doctor's footstep outside the door. When Dr. Winchester came in, he looked intently at the patient before speaking. His brows were set, and his mouth was a thin, hard line. Presently he said, "There is much in common between the sleep of your father and Nurse Kennedy. Whatever influence has brought it about has probably worked the same way in both cases. In Kennedy's case, the coma is less marked. I cannot but feel, however, that with her we may be able to do more and more quickly than with this patient, as our hands are not tied. I have placed her in a draught, and already she shows some signs, though very faint ones, of ordinary unconsciousness. The rigidity of her limbs is less, and her skin seems more sensitive, or, perhaps I should say, less insensitive to pain." "How is it then," I asked, "that Mr. Trelawney is still in this state of insensibility, and yet, so far as we know, his body has not had such rigidity at all?" "That I cannot answer. The problem is one which we may solve in a few hours, or it may need a few days, but it will be a useful lesson in diagnosis to us all, and perhaps to many and many others after us, who knows," he added with the genuine fire of an enthusiast. As the morning wore on, he flitted perpetually between the two rooms, watching anxiously over both patients. He made Mrs. Grant remain with the nurse, but either Miss Trelawney or I, generally both of us, remained with the wounded man. We each managed, however, to get bathed and dressed. The doctor and Mrs. Grant remained with Mr. Trelawney whilst we had breakfast. Sergeant Daw went off to report at Scotland Yard the progress of the night, and then to the local station to arrange for the coming of his comrade Wright, as fixed with Superintendent Dolan. When he returned, I could not but think that he had been hauled over the coals for shooting in a sick room, or perhaps for shooting at all without certain and proper cause. His remark to me enlightened me in the matter. "A good character is worth something, sir, in spite of what some of them say. See, I've still got leave to carry my revolver." That day was a long and anxious one. Toward nightfall, Nurse Kennedy so far improved that the rigidity of her limbs entirely disappeared. She still breathed quietly and regularly, but the fixed expression of her face, though it was a calm enough expression, gave place to fallen eyelids and the negative look of sleep. Dr. Winchester had, towards evening, brought 2 more nurses, one of whom was to remain with Nurse Kennedy, and the other to share in the watching with Miss Trelawney, who had insisted on remaining up herself. She had, in order to prepare for the duty, slept for several hours in the afternoon. We had all taken counsel together, and had arranged thus for the watching in Mr. Trelawney's room. Mrs. Grant was to remain beside the patient till 12, when Miss Trelawney would relieve her. The new nurse was to sit in Miss Trelawney's room, and to visit the sick chamber each quarter of an hour. The doctor would remain till 12, when I was to relieve him. One or other of the detectives was to remain within hail of the room all night, and to pay periodical visits to see that all was well. Thus the watchers would be watched, and the possibility of such events as last night, when the watchers were both overcome, would be avoided. When the sun set, a strange and grave anxiety fell on all of us, and in our separate ways we prepared for the vigil. Dr. Winchester had evidently been thinking of my respirator, for he told me he would go out and get one. Indeed, he took to the idea so kindly that I persuaded Miss Trelawney also to have one which she could put on when her time for watching came. And so the night drew on,